Names, books, and organizations that have been talking about that issue. We have issues related with century in 19th century, in which, for example, George Perkins was the first writer talking about the global conception of our environment on his book by the name of Man and Nature. I'm talking about 1865. Also, we have comments about John Moore, which was the founder of Sierra Club, which is one of the most well-known organizations related with conservation back in 1892. And he is related with the father of the national parks in the US. Also, we have heard about Aldo Leopold, which was an influential conservationist that developed the concept of environmental ethics in 1949. And in 1951, there is an organization by the name of Nature Conservancy that is the largest environmental nonprofit by assets and revenues in the Americas and perhaps in the world. And that organization nowadays, it's being led by Mark Tercek, which is the CEO and president of the organization. And back in the past, chairman of the board of directors, Mr. Henry Paulson, which are our guest of honors on this coffee. Please join us to the post, please. And you want to make a small introduction about Wendy. Please join us. Ernesto is going to make it. Also is joining us Wendy, his wife's Henry Paulson, please. Well, in this venture, it's going to help me Ernesto Enkerlin. As you may know, he is Exatec as well. He is president of the World Commission of Protected Areas, and actually is leader of Natural Solutions of Monterrey Tech. And he is an expert about this topic, and that's what I asked him to help me with this really good adventure. I would like to give a little bit of comments about Henry and later on about Mark and Wendy, just for us to put on the same context. Henry Paulson served under President George Bush as the 74th Secretary of the Treasury, served as Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Goldman Sachs. He is involved in a range of conservationist and environmental initiatives. He is currently co-chair of the Latin America Conservation Council. In February 2010, Mr. Paulson published his first book, On the Brink. He received an MBA from Harvard back in 1970. Thank you very much for coming, Mr. Paulson, and we will be glad to hear your comments about this topic. Ernesto?
Thank you. I would also like to introduce Mark Tercek. Mark is currently, as we heard, the CEO of the Nature Conservancy and also its president. And the Nature Conservancy is the world's leading conservation organization. Mark was involved before, and I think the conservation world is lucky to have people migrate over from other areas to make conservation really work. He was involved as managing director of Goldman Sachs, and he was key in developing the firm's environmental platform. So he was in the environmental sector before, within the financial sector. And now we're lucky to have him as the CEO and president of the Nature Conservancy. He is very active, serving on several boards and councils. He is a member of Resources for the Future, the Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions, and the Commission on Climate and Tropical Forests. He's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and one of the Global Council members of the World Economic Forum, which is a very important position to shape the future of sustainability. He has an MBA from Harvard and a BA from Williams College, and he recently published a book. I don't know how you find time for that, Mark, but, and the book is called Nature's Fortune, How Business and Society Thrive by Investing in Nature. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Well, I would like to start by putting a question, very open question, and we will move from there. And the question is related to leadership. There is a gentleman by the name of Simon Sinek who said that people don't follow leaders, either organizations or persons, for what they do, but instead for why they do it. And my first question will be, why the Latin America Conservation Council do what they do? And why Mr. Paulson, Wendy, if you may, and Mark do what you do?
Okay. So frankly, being in wild, beautiful, natural places has been of interest to me my entire life. So I had a natural affinity for the outdoors. I have a wife who got me involved in conservation very early. Her involvement with the Nature Conservancy predated mine. She chaired the Illinois board, the New York board, and it got me involved. And it's been a passion, and then this region in particular has been one which we've visited for years and years, multiple times. So this is our first love. You know, whether it's the Yucatan or Oaxaca, this is my first time here, but we spend a lot of time here. And I think your question more broadly goes to, I think it's the why is the case you need to make. And you don't change behavior unless people understand why.
That's right.
You know, leadership, I found, I've led in the private sector, in government, and in NGOs. And what I find in all cases, the management challenge is actually greater in government than it is in the other two. But in each one of these, the key question is, how do you bring others along, and how do you explain to them why it is important? And in government, you need to get the public behind you. Political leaders basically do what the voters want them to do. And so I think behavior change is very, very important, and it's all about persuading those who you want to follow you.
Well, why did I get into the conservation business? I'm different than Hank and Wendy. I spent most of my life in cities without that much exposure to nature. And then two things happened. My wife and I became parents, and we made an effort to get our kids outdoors. And as we did that, we both fell in love with the outdoors and nature. And I think that was an important lesson for me as an environmentalist. I think everybody has an inner environmentalist within them. And people with jobs like mine just have to make that opportunity available for people. And then second, I was a business person. I worked on Wall Street with Hank, and I was one of those business people who thought business could be a force for good. So I became very interested in working with business to address environmental challenges. And that's one of the major focuses of the Nature Conservancy.
Great.
And I would just add that I've always loved nature, as Hank mentioned, but I've worked with children for many years, and I see that the rich natural heritage that we all have is something that I want to see future generations have. And I can't imagine a high quality of living without the richness of life that we have, whether it's plants, forests, deserts, oceans, and all of the creatures that inhabit those. It would just be a much compromised and diminished and even impoverished experience. And then if you get into I think people's livelihoods are going to also diminish without a robust, healthy planet to support them.
Okay, understand.
Thank you. It seems like we've come a long way over the last, just in my generation. I remember when I was a kid, I was sort of off base with most of the rest because these things about nature and conservation were not really in people's minds. Now they're in the minds of the business sector, they're in the minds of political leaders. We've done a lot of very good things. We've achieved many things, and we have many success stories, but they seem to be contained. We have like a green council for this and a green council for that, and then even within business, we have the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and then we have the World Economic Forum to which you participate. But it seems like we haven't achieved becoming mainstream. The environment and sustainability are still believed or seen as to be out of the mainstream. So how do you think that we could achieve greater, faster, and better results in sustainability, and instead of having the Green Building Council, that the Building Council is green, that the Business Council is green, and that all that we do as a society is really incorporating the environment or the natural capital into it?
I could even be a little bit more negative than that if I wanted to, because what the history of the environmental movement of the last 50 years, the last 20 years, has been one of winning a lot of little battles, but losing the war. And as we're destroying our natural ecosystems. And so I really believe the world is getting close to the tipping point, and this region is getting close to the tipping point, that our economic model today is a flawed economic model in many ways. It's based upon the premise that nature is a free good. Water is free, energy is free, the whole ecosystems that support the food we eat, you know, the air we breathe, and so on. And so that's the negative. The positive is that we now have the science, we have the knowledge to solve these problems. So it all exists. My generation, our generation, is the first generation that has got the knowledge and the wherewithal to solve the problem. But it really comes down to the point you're making. We have to understand something that many business leaders understand today, and that is that economic development is not at odds with sound ecological or environmental practices if you take a longer term viewpoint, because you can only build prosperity over the longer term. So that if we don't reinvest in nature, this growth won't be sustainable. So what we're fighting is short-termism, and we need to take a longer term. And the thing that I am so encouraged about right now, and I'm encouraged about it in this country and throughout the region, is that there's a growing number of large businesses that really understand the point that you're making. And I think what brought us to Monterey today, and I think rather than just having me talk too much, I'd go to Mark and have him tell us what brought us here today, because that really is, you know, business focusing on a longer term issue in an enlightened way, which is water, which is going to be one of the huge challenges that we face in Mexico and all around the world over the next 25 years.
Okay, thanks, Hank. I'll just add, the reason Wendy, Hank, and I are here as members of the Nature Conservancy and representing the Latin America Conservation Council is to focus on what we call the Monterey Water Fund. And the idea is, particularly for this visit, we're trying to recruit business leaders, who we've been talking about this with, local business leaders, to come together with the Nature Conservancy and invest in protecting Monterey's watershed. Why? because we need to ensure that there's adequate water supply for the city. Also, we need protection against floods, and we need preparation to deal with potential droughts. And our hypothesis is, based on science, that if we invest in protecting the watershed through programs like reforestation, those kinds of initiatives, not only can the water supply be protected, not only can you be better protected from storms or from droughts, you'll also have the additional environmental benefits. Areas for wildlife to live, beautiful areas to visit, but also this important vital service, clean water, protection from storms, protection against droughts. And what's exciting, we think, is it's business leaders, local business leaders, and their colleagues who are going to make this happen. And to us, that's a really great example, Ernesto, of mainstreaming environmental issues.
And I'll just add, Ernesto, you said, why aren't we making more progress? I think a lot these days about what I call ecological illiteracy. And I think we have a lot of it in our society at every level. And if, to the extent that we understand issues like water, where it's coming from, we're better prepared to make good decisions. I like to say that, that I think children growing up not only should know their street address and their telephone number and all of that, but they should know what watershed they come into the world and do, and what ecosystem they come from. It's when you know those things, you try to understand them better, and you make better decisions. And I think that it's easy to make poor decisions without all the information. And once I like to tell the story about four boys that I had mentored in New York and came down to visit us in Washington. And I kept hearing, I was wondering why they weren't coming to breakfast. And I heard the water going, and going. And they finally came down, and I said, what were you taking those showers so long for? And one said, first of all, well, that there wasn't any hot water, that had all gone. And then I said, do you know where the water comes from? They said, yeah, the faucet. And so we had quite a conversation then, but I think this has to be done on a broad scale, not just in Monterey, not just in Mexico, throughout the world, so that we all are more intelligent about all the natural elements that support us.
Mark, you mentioned your visit into Monterey because of the relationship with Latin America. It is not a coincidence. Monterey, it's within the 25 cities with most risk in water situation. Mm-hmm. What problems did you really find in Monterey that put us in that risk?
Well, the challenges for, I'm not an expert in the Monterey watershed, so I should be careful, but the challenges arise from deforestation. Forests act like a marvelous mechanism that Mother Nature designed. The forests act like a sponge, and when there's intense waterfall, the forest absorbs the water, it cleans the water, and then it slowly releases the water. And so when the forest is gone, that doesn't happen. The water comes down, and there's nothing to slow it, and so it washes away. It takes topsoil with it, too. And so you have too much water at once. That's not good. Then you have floods. And you also lose your topsoil, not good. And that topsoil goes into your freshwater systems and pollutes it. So one of the interventions would be reforestation, to slow down the water so that you don't have floods. And also then when the water is slowed down, it recharges your aquifers so you can draw on the water when you need it. You protect your topsoil, you keep your water clean. There are other interventions as well. For example, sometimes fencing. This sounds so simple, but it otherwise doesn't happen. Installing fencing to keep livestock away from rivers can be a very important way to protect water supply. These kinds of interventions. It takes some science, but more than science, it takes some willingness and determination of community leaders, business leaders, government officials, local communities to work together to protect this vital asset, your water supply.
And I'd add one other thing, which is to talk about green infrastructure versus gray infrastructure. that basically people and mayors all around the world understand gray infrastructure. If they invest in, you need gray infrastructure, you need dams, you need aqueducts and things. But if they invest in gray infrastructure, they can say, look what I did, I built this. You know, and it's harder with green. And they can also, there's no doubt the gray infrastructure is ample room for corruption. And I'm not just saying this in Latin America, it's just throughout the world, the developing world. So it is very important for people to look upstream and look at the watershed. And there's countless, the reason we talk about water so much, that's the easiest case to make, because there are many examples. In New York, it's just been proven. You make a much smaller investment in preserving, you know, the forest in the watershed in the Hudson Valley, and then minimize the amount of investment it takes in water treatment plants in New York City. So we have examples all around the region, but there are many other examples. Just in general, the Latin American Conservation Council is focused on water security, and so you see these water funds throughout the region, and a big effort here in Monterey. Food security, how do you double food production without destroying natural habitat? And again, because if you cut down the forest, in addition to all the benefits, you know, all the issues that Mark talked about, you won't even have the water. The reason you've got so much water in this region is you've got the forest to begin with, and which is a big blessing. And then just infrastructure generally, smart infrastructure. This region needs infrastructure to grow. One of the problems, this region is blessed in Mexico with top line growth, but not enough of the benefits have gone down and been spread more broadly around the population. There's big income inequalities. And infrastructure to get more people into the middle class is going to be incredibly important for there to be political success and stability over the longer term. But again, we have to, there's a good way to build a dam. There's a good way to build a mine. There's a good way to build a road. And again, that's another thing the Latin American Conservation Council is focused on.
And I would say that there are better ways to build them. but the other thing I would say between gray, the reason to invest more in green infrastructure when possible, rather than gray infrastructure, is that the gray, the hard stuff, is lifeless, frankly, and the green infrastructure brings more vitality to a region. There are all kinds of extra benefits as wildlife habitat, as plant habitat, as places for people to be out in nature. And so there are all kinds of benefits that often aren't taken into the traditional accounting.
Thank you. We of course love Mexico very much, but we also see that Mexico has a role to play in the world, in the global arena, in terms of bringing the sustainability message along. And of course, we also love our alma mater, Monterey Tech, which is the only really national institution of education in Mexico, because we're all over the place. We have 32 campuses, and many of our alumni are business leaders, such as we presented here. Henry, for example, is very busy engaging China, US, both in environment and business. What type of roles do you see for Mexico in the world and for Monterey Tech students and alumni in achieving this change for sustainability? How do we speed things up?
Well, I would just simply say, I think you know it, and so that Mexico is increasingly an important global engine. When you look at what's happening around the world, this country is a bright spot in terms of global growth. When you look at China, You mentioned China and engaging with China. Xi Jinping came to Mexico before he came to the United States. So he was here meeting with your president and talking about economic growth and development. Your companies are increasingly global leaders. And you've got some of the most progressive, best companies in the world. And so we're here working with the FEMSA Foundation. And of course, they understand water as well as anything. We work with the Latin American Conservation Council with a range of Mexican companies. The co-chair is Roberto Hernandez of Banamex. We have companies like Grupo Bimbo with Daniel Ceviche, again, a real leader in sustainability. You have Cemex, a leader of sustainability. The Televisa with Emilio Escarraga, is a member of our Latin American Conservation Council. A number of members, the dairy group Lala with Tarisho. So there is real Mexican leaders globally in terms of business. And again, I think business can go a lot further in what they do. But frankly, I think big business is ahead of government in most places around the world. Now, and way ahead of small business in terms of some of the in some of the practices in the region.
Okay.
Well, I might add, I'm kind of optimistic about the future, and sometimes people say to me, Mark, how can you be optimistic? You run the Nature Conservancy, it's a science-based organization. We have such huge challenges. But I am optimistic because I see, as Hank was mentioning, business leaders increasingly getting their act together, et cetera. But here would be my advice to you, the audience here today. I think there's at least 4 things that you can do. First of all, many of you have connections to businesses. You're business leaders yourself, or you teach business students, or you're advising business. Push business to do more. Hank just named a bunch of the businesses that we work closely with. They have all learned it makes business sense to take care of nature. It's good for your bottom line. That's business. And I think we should be encouraged by progress. But sometimes when we talk about business, people think then we've written off the government. But we need an enlightened government. And that's where you all come in again, your voters and your citizens. So in all democratic countries, we need to push our governments to take a long-term, science-based, pro-environmental view. Not so that it's at the expense of the economy, but for that win-win outcome. Good for the economy, good for nature. Then there's another thing. This might sound self-serving, but I'm not here to pitch the Nature Conservancy today, but support the nonprofit organizations that you like. There are many great environmental nonprofit organizations. TNC is a very big one. There are good ones that are big. There are good ones that are small. We need them all. They're all under-resourced. They can use your help. That means donations, but not only donations. That means your help. Your business people, your academics, your scientists, your young people who can help organize. Get involved. And then finally, most importantly, we need young people on our side. The next couple of decades are going to be challenging, so we need young people who respect and love nature. And looking at you, some of you are old enough to be parents. Some of you might even be grandparents. I bet many of you are brothers and sisters or uncles and aunts. Take the young people you know outside, help them appreciate nature like Wendy does. That, I think, is the most important thing for us to do.
And I'll just pick up on that and say that I think to the extent that each of us maximizes our capacity as both a learner and a teacher, so that we're always educating ourselves as deeply as possible about our planet, about its ecology, and that we in turn teach others about that, and whether it's taking a child out or a grandchild. First of all, they have a natural curiosity. You don't have to, you just have to get them there. Their curiosity will kick right in. And I think that, you know, cities today have become the real leaders. And as far as Monterey, I'm thinking back, there was a time when New York was considered pretty ecologically backward. Once a city begins to get it and decides they want to be a leader, we found in the United States there's almost become a competition for the greenest city. And I think that, you know, to the extent that Monterey really wants to take up that baton and become a leader, whether in the water funds and probably in lots of other ways, it can generate great pride through the metropolis.
And I would say push your governments, because every major environmental problem, behind it is a flawed government policy. Nature isn't a free good. As long as we treat water as if it's free, it's going to be hard to solve the problem. And I could say we've got, in every country of the world, we've got flawed agricultural policies. We just do. You know, we win the prize for, you know, among the worst policies in the United States in terms of when you look at some of our agriculture policies. And so and again, that gets back to public awareness, and because basically elected officials do what those who elect them want them to do. That's how they get their jobs. And so again, I think that's a big responsibility for all of us. And it gets back to awareness and education if you're going to change behavior. But we can't keep treating nature like it's a free good, and it's inexhaustible, because so we need new business models and new ways of approaching economic growth.
May I ask you a specific question, Wendy? Is there any project or a specific initiative to work with kids and youth about this concept that you think it may work in Mexico? Sometimes it's very difficult to take programs from other parts of the world and try to export into Latin American economies. I don't know why, but perhaps with your investigation or your interest on that issue, you may help us on learning how to do it.
I can't name them specifically, but I'm confident that you have many models right here in Mexico. Ernesto would be able to tell me, you'd probably be able to list any number of them. But I find that the local initiatives are very powerful, and often just in small towns and communities, cities, wherever. Undoubtedly, there are NGOs that are here.
The story we heard about Costa Rica, which I think is very similar, with education, getting kids out, you know.
Oh, okay. Hank is referring to one. This isn't, it happens to be in Costa Rica, but in Guanacaste, where Dan Jansen is active, and he was worried about the future of the park that he's stewarded for so long, and began involving a lot of the local children who are from very impoverished areas in the just in educating them about it, involving them in the ongoing management of the park. And it turns out that when it came for exam time, those kids scored so much higher than any of the other children in the area. And so, which just underscored for me the value of nature as a classroom, as well as a generator of all kinds of ecological goods.
See, what was fascinating to me, they asked them to retake the test because they did so much better on a national basis. And when you get people outside in the environment and learning and a part of the natural world, I think that can not only increase their ecological literacy, it will help them learn in many other ways. And one of the things I think we're all concerned about, and I don't think this has to do with, I think it's the same in China, it's the same in Latin America, as it is in Europe and in the US. People are people. And if you don't understand something or experience it or know it, it's hard to love it and appreciate it. And if you're just looking at a computer all day or playing video games, you're going to be missing a lot.
Yeah, and I have a friend, for instance, in Sayulita, who started just a small local program. But again, with the same results, the children are, there's not an issue of engaging them. They faced with given the opportunity to have experience in the natural world, and I don't know the educational landscape in Mexico here as well as in the United States, but in our country, children are increasingly insulated from the natural world, and they are so focused on their devices and their indoors and so forth. If they are given the chance, especially very early on, their curiosity just explodes, and all of the elements that are necessary for lifelong learning and education are just nurtured in the natural world. The focus, the curiosity, the sense of wonder, the questioning. And so, you know, in that way, I've kind of, I don't mean to avoid your question, but I know that there are models already here. There are plenty of models in our country and others, but I don't know that there's any one particular one. You just have to know what is especially yours and get to know it. I was very inspired by a 12-year-old Chinese girl recently who she was shown some birds in her area on the coast of China, and one of them being something called a spoon-billed sandpiper, which is one of the most endangered shorebirds in the world. And she's going to be a force to reckon with, I can just tell. She got up and gave a presentation in English, her second language, before 400 adults about why it was important to save the spoon-billed sandpiper and wetlands in China. Wow. And she just says, it's because I love it. I want to have this bird in my experience, you know, in my life experience, and I want my friends to enjoy it. And I thought, boy, this girl can communicate better than most adults can. So it's really important to get the children involved.
No doubt about it. Ernesto, is there any question? Well, or think about your question after this one.
Very quickly, I would like to add, here at Monterey Tech, we believe very strongly that we need the kids that graduate to be the best for the world out there. And of course, the best engineers and the best business administrators and the best social scientists, or the best whatever they choose, because everyone is necessary for sustainability. But there's 3 areas that we focus on. One is ethics, the other one is sustainability, and the other one is citizenship. Sorry, I forgot citizenship for a few seconds. But at any rate, so they're all interconnected, because there is an intergenerational ethical foundation for sustainability. Sustainability needs a participating, active, and democratic system, which is only achieved through good citizens. And of course, sustainability itself is only going to be brought about, as you have said, by changing the way we live and the way we act every day. So that's one of the things we're doing at Monterey Tech. And I also have some examples from my pass through government, but I think that would be a good one for what you were asking previously.
My feeling is that in Latin America in general, in Mexico specifically, there's no such a public policy for the environment. And you have talked about pushing our government towards this type of policies. What are the best ways to do this? Because the environmental policy is not in the top of mind in the voters, and it's of course not in the mind of many politicians. Of course, we have NGOs which have done very efficient work in that regard, but I would like to know what is the best way to push the government in this in these efforts. And a quick second question: what do you think about global warming and climate change, and how did this affect nature's conservation? And what do you think about the official position of the United States towards this topic? That's my question. Thank you.
To start on the public policy, I would say that as I said, I think in most countries, public policy isn't where it needs to be, number one. In a country like Mexico, which is still a developing country and has widespread poverty and many challenges along those lines, I don't think it's that unusual for some of the environmental policies to be lagging, because it's not just, when you look at developing countries, it's not just the law, it is the enforcement of the law. In many countries, Mexico included, the laws, a big part of it is how do you enforce the law, and how do you drive policy. And again, that's why I made the comments I made. I think big business, and I think this surprises people when we say this, and this isn't to say that big business has perfect environmental policies. I can be very critical of the policies of many big businesses, but I do think that the best companies in every industry are invariably leaders, because they recognize that it makes sense for them. It's going to help them attract customers, attract employees. It's going to be good for them. But I don't have a simple answer on driving policy, because I think a lot of that has to do with public awareness. I think the way to influence leaders is not just through education and through lobbying and making the case, but it needs to come from the grassroots. And I think the good news is we have is that science has now reached the point that we have very, very good solutions. Now, in terms of climate is something I take very, very seriously. I think the science is overwhelming. It is overwhelming. And so I ask myself all the time, why is it that my generation seems to be such a selfish generation? We have the science, we know there's a huge problem. Why aren't more people concerned? And I think it's because many of us have been trained to learn that whenever people predict a disaster, it's never quite as bad as everyone predicts. And so I think we are discounting this, and it's something where I just really believe we need enlightened policy. Now, where is the U.S.? We don't have really a comprehensive climate policy in the U.S. I'm very pleased that the Obama administration has announced a policy, and that's an important step. But you can't just announce a policy. You have to sell it to the public and sell it to a skeptical public, and we need a comprehensive policy. And so there's much more that needs to be done. Now, if you look at the United States, we have a situation where our emissions as a percentage of GDP and our energy efficiency and all those things are moving in the right direction. So what the U.S. does is very important, not just because we're the largest economy, but it's particularly important because we need to be a leader and set an example for other places in the world where, to take China, which is the second largest economy, but it's the biggest emitter of carbon, and carbon emissions are growing. So where I spend my time with the Paulson Institute is on urbanization in China, because I really believe that those outcomes as the next 250 million people go to the cities in China, that's going to be a huge driver of carbon emissions. But again, that's a big area for the U.S. to work with China. And I'm encouraged. I don't mean to be too critical of what's going on in my government, because I'm encouraged of all the collaboration that's being done with, for instance, with China in the climate area, and all the work that, as Wendy is saying, is being done at the municipal level with cities, and being done as energy efficiency is increasing. So we're not a model in terms of where we should be in climate policy, but we're making progress.
I work for a Mexican nonprofit, and we do have TNC as a partner, and it's great to have this partnership. We are doing interesting things. My comment is related to Mark's 4 points. I think they summarize what could be done as a practitioner's example here in Monterrey, or more precisely in this municipality where we are close by, which is Garza Garcia. I think we could have a case of demonstrating that you can have this virtuous link between businessmen and between communities, between young people, because in the end, all this construction that is happening, and I'm sure you are aware of the amazing amount of condominiums and buildings we are putting in the area. I think there's a great opportunity to link watershed conservation and real estate development at this moment. All of those projects which are meaningful and are needed so that we can have a space for the younger generations will require water, and we're living in a water-stressed community. So I think here we have a wonderful example, or a wonderful case for FEMSA and TNC, Latin America Conservation Council, to put all of these ideas in practice and linking those sectors and somehow working also together with government. And regarding this idea of the lack of public policy in Mexico, we do have very good public policy in Mexico, but sometimes we lack political will to make it work towards the environment. So once we have that combination, and that we convince authorities that we should have a longer view, a more precise definition of what's our natural capital, and work with formulas that make them look good and at the same time have concrete benefits, I think we have a possible formula. So I'm very happy to have you here, and hopefully you tackle this or other project for our city.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I might just add, we're very optimistic and excited about the opportunity in Monterrey for two reasons. First, we want to do good work here in Monterrey to protect the ecosystems. But then we want a good example to use elsewhere to show people that, yes, business can come together, work with environmentalists, and work on good policy together to protect nature in a way that works economically and works environmentally. We need more good examples, and then we have to spread the word as fast as possible.
Is there a room to fail in this new approach?
Is there room to fail? Yeah, we always, it's really interesting. I worked on Wall Street for so long, and when I worked there, I thought the work was so challenging. Now in hindsight, it seems easy compared to what we do today. On Wall Street, we did the same thing over and over. It made it a very good business. In the environmental movement, we're often doing things that have never been done before.
That's right.
Never before in Monterrey have businesses been asked to come together to work with environmentalists, to invest money into protecting watersheds as we described. And so for sure we will make mistakes. And then the good news, though, is in the environmental space, we have a lot of people who keep a close eye on one another and are quick to criticize. And at first, when they criticized me when I was at the Nature Conservancy, it made me feel bad. But now I understand those critics are our friends. They want what we have. And in that back and forth, we can learn and do our job better. I think that's the pathway forward. So yes, there's room for mistakes. Mistakes are inevitable.
That's right.
But mistakes are also okay if you learn from them and then do a better job going forwards. The water fund that we're trying to put together for Monterrey, we have done a number of those successfully elsewhere. And it's worked very, very well. It's been a great model to bring people together. There's been less fighting, and rather people have coming together and say, I see, if we invest in protecting nature, we'll get this good benefit. So Ernesto mentioned my book. I wrote this book. I wanted to be optimistic about investing in nature, and many of the examples are water-related ones because we want to encourage people to do more of this stuff.
We have places in the south of the country that it rains a lot. It rains a lot, like Tabasco, Villahermosa, for example. And then we have other places that don't rain in the north of the country, like Monterrey, Chihuahua State, such. What do you think about the project that could carry water from those places that rains a lot to those other places that don't rain? Is it possible? Is it available? There are long distance from one place to another.
You know, I think it's difficult to answer a question like that and to generalize. In the United States, we have a lot of experience in the past moving water from places where there is water to places where there was not water. Some of those experiments have been good, some have been very, very bad. In China today, they have enormous challenges along these fronts. And China is a country led by engineers, so they like these infrastructure investments to move things around. And it looks like some will be good, but some might not be so good. So what we always say at the Nature Conservancy is let's use science and let's try to come up with the best solution for that local ecosystem. It's dangerous, I think, to generalize. But we know some things. In the meantime, let's protect our watersheds. Let's protect our forests that are so important. And let's use water as carefully as we can. Let's not waste water so that we have as little of that challenge as possible.
And we always lean against the wind when it comes to those kinds of projects. Not to say they're not necessary sometimes in good projects, but that is what government people, mayors and provincial leaders in China or state governors here naturally turn to, okay? They understand that. They create jobs, there's room for corruption, they can show the public this is what we've done. And the one thing we do know for sure, you'll need less of that if you preserve your water everywhere. You'll need less.
Well, we are just about to finish. Thank you very much for coming to this Coffee with Leaders. The coffee is out there. Sorry. And thank you very, very much for joining us on this experience. You may count with 250,000 alumni from Monterrey Tech all over the world, and lots of them in Latin America. So if we can be of any help to promote ideas, to bring those executives or CEOs that are related with different companies in Latin America, please, we will be glad to do it through our networks. And we are very, very honored to have you here in Monterrey Tech. And
I want to thank everybody for being here, giving your valuable time to come here. This is a very exciting city. It is very impressive, I would say, for someone who hadn't visited here before. This institution is a terrific institution, and thank you all for giving us your